110 acres has basically been bought by a company 90% owned by friends and close associates of Lord Houchen at £1 an acre. The company, 90% owned by these associates, has a turnover of £143 million and about £50 million in profit in 1 year that has largely now gone out to these private shareholders. Does that sound like best value was secured for taxpayers?
I can't answer that question, as you know.
If I can focus on the Tees Valley Freeport, I mean, it's caused so much controversy in the since the beginning of the development. It appears to be, one of the only freeports that has caused such controversy. It appears to be a bit of a secretive, murky, dodgy deal, backroom deal, cronyism of the highest order, people making fortunes at the expense of the taxpayer. And I think that needs to be proved wrong. You mentioned in your earlier contribution in response to Mr. Chapman, I think it was that the review was ongoing.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've got to get to the bottom of this, Secretary of State, because the reality is the country is the people in the country are fed up with the money issue, the post office issue, cronyism, people making fortunes on the back of the taxpayer. So it's really important that we get to the bottom of this. And I'm sure you've seen or maybe not seen it, but heard of the point of order raised by Alex Cunningham yesterday with regard to the annual accounts which were produced by Teesworks yesterday. Tripled its profits. However, £54 million, which was the profits, 90% of the shares in Teesworks have been handed by the mayor to two businessmen, and 10% of the shares remain with the organisation, the taxpayer, as it were. So that means 54 million, before jobs being created, £54 million profits being made. But two businessmen have made £48.6 million of that. And the taxpayer gets 54 million. Does that not set alarm bells ringing in your department, Secretary of State?
First of all, thank you very much. I normally feel a lot better than I look. But it's particularly so at the moment. It's very kind of you to ask. And I think the points that you raise and which Alex have raised, I know have been matters of concern, absolutely. And to be fair, there are also matters of concern to Ben Houchen, to the mayor himself. And that's why Ben was very, very keen that there be a proper and rigorous inquiry to get to the root of things, because some of the allegations that have been made go beyond some of the things that you've said, Ian. So, there have been allegations of potential criminality as well. So we wanted to make sure there was a proper inquiry. Angie Ridgewell, who's the Chief Executive of Lancashire County Council, has been doing that. It's taken slightly longer, I think, than any of us would have wanted, and that's because she and her team have been thorough. I hope that the inquiry will conclude its work shortly, but I can't, and I know this is what ministers always say, and it can be irritating, but I can't preempt it. So there's a lot I'd like to say, because I'm a big fan of Ben's and a big fan of what I believe he's achieved. But what I don't want to do is to preempt what the inquiry will conclude. But I do want to say that you and Alex, I know, are asking questions that others have asked, and that is perfectly legitimate, and it's important that Angie and her team respond appropriately to your questions.
As you, Secretary of State or your officials, has anybody seen the report or parts of the report yet?
I have not, but officials, of course, have been working to make sure that all the information that Angie Ridgewell and her team require has been shared with them. But I don't know what the conclusions of the report are, no.
There hasn't been any attempt by your officials to dilute the report, the initial recommendations, for example.
I don't believe that any such. I can't believe that any of our officials would ever do that.
Is there much in terms of communications between your officials and Angie? Angie Ridgewell? In terms of what they've already seen, because there's a big fear that, and there's an understanding, by the way, and I might as well say it, that there's been some interference from your officials with regards to the initial findings of this review, and I mean, I'll accept what you say on that, but it might be very, very helpful, if the communications between your officials and Angie Ridgewell could be sent to this committee, for example, just for clarification.
Again, I totally understand. I have no reason at all to doubt her integrity, the integrity of her team, or the integrity of officials. I know that this committee, and indeed Clive's committee, will take a close interest in the report when it's published. If, on publication, there are further questions that you, Ian, or anyone else wants to ask, then I will make sure that we address them. It's normally the case when you have an independent inquiry like this that you will have some people from the department who will be there to act as a secretariat, to get the material together, to help to answer the questions and so on. But we want total transparency on this. I have not seen the report. I do not know what
your officials have.
There will have been people in the department who will have seen at least part of it, but I have deliberately said I want to see the report out as early as possible, but I also wanted to answer all of the questions that have been raised, and I wanted to be comprehensive.
Many of those questions are now begged by the publication of the Teesworks accounts, the first year of those accounts. Have you read those accounts?
I have not.
Are you familiar with what they say?
Broadly familiar, yes.
So, as you all know, the piece of land which is on the maps here, 110 acres has basically been bought by a company, 90% owned by friends and close associates of Lord Houchen at £1 an acre. £1 an acre, that's 110 acres. There was then a leasing deal and some rights over scrap metal on the site. That together means that the company, 90% owned by these associates, has a turnover of £143 million and about £50 million in profit in 1 year that has largely now gone out to these private shareholders. In your view, at first blush, does that sound like best value was secured for taxpayers?
I can't answer that question, as you know, because while this inquiry is going on, what I mustn't do is preempt or end run its conclusions. Separately, as I mentioned to Ian, I am a huge champion of what Ben Houchen has done. Were I in any other role other than this one, I would be more than happy to mount not just a defence, but a vigorous and energetic defence of the approach that he has taken throughout. But serious issues have been raised. Ian and you have articulated them. We take them seriously, and that is why we want the report to do its work properly and then conclude. And I can't, and I know it's frustrating for me, as it must be for the committee. I can't, before, what you were inviting me to do, and a perfectly legitimate question, of course, is to say,
it's a simple question.
It's to look at the headline on a press report from a trial.
It's not a press report, it's a set of company accounts, and what it says is that in 1 year, a company that's bought 110 acres for £1 an acre is now turning over 143 million and shoveling 50 million pounds out to private shareholders in profits. And I guess my question to you is, are you confident that we have secured best value for taxpayers? Let me put the question another way. Have you got full confidence in the governance of Teesworks Limited today?
Again, you're asking me a question about this particular issue, which an investigation is currently looking at in detail. From this committee's point of view, perhaps excessive detail. To ask me to preempt it would be, well, it's legitimate to ask, but it would be wrong for me to preempt it.
Okay, well, let me ask you whether you've got full confidence in Lord Houchen's conduct in relation to this matter.
I do, yes. I have the highest regard for him. But what I don't want to do is, by anything that I say, to preempt the conclusions of the investigation. I can speak on a personal level.
You can.
And I can say that I have the
You're even protected by parliamentary privilege here.
I have the highest regard for Ben in all of my observations and dealings with him. I think that he is a first-rate public servant who's been responsible for the economic transformation of the Tees Valley, and he is a great and visionary leader in local government.
You must accept when there are such heightened concerns about, for example, the PPE contracts, when we have a deal like this that appears to be routing £50 million in profit on a very strange deal that has released 110 acres for £1 an acre, there are real concerns about whether taxpayer interest has been safeguarded. And my question to you is, do you have full confidence in whether the arrangements have secured best value for taxpayers?
I'd say two things. The reason why the inquiry has been set up is to establish that. You mentioned PPE, again, perfectly legitimately. Because I do know something about the disjuncture between the reporting of what happened with PPE and the reality, then I know that many of the judgments that people have made there, on the basis of what they've read and what's been reported, are utterly at variance with the truth.
Well, to be fair, I'm merely quoting from the company accounts.
Indeed.
They've only been published for 1 year, and they were published two or 3 days ago.
My experience, and I believe, Chair, it's helpful that you've made that analogy. My experience is that there have been some people who have quoted facts, unambiguous facts, relating to the procurement of PPE, but those facts quoted in isolation have given a wholly erroneous picture of the procurement decisions that were made and the context in which they were made.
So there remain questions in your mind about whether the taxpayer's interest has been best safeguarded?
Again, by definition, setting up an inquiry is there to satisfy other people's questions, and I have to avoid...
But you must be curious.
I'm endlessly curious, but you're trying brilliantly to get me to preempt or to end run the conclusions of an independent inquiry.
You'll see how...
And I won't.
Here is a case where company accounts have been produced. They show some pretty strange behaviour. They don't appear to say, on the face of it, that the taxpayer interest has been safeguarded. You have chosen not to invite the NAO to come in and have a look at this in detail. That raises questions about whether Freeport governance as a policy is in a good place.
Yeah, well, I think the key thing is that the issues raised all relate to activity before the establishment of the Freeport.
That's not quite true, because some of the money that has gone in through the Freeport, I think it's about £21 million, £21.5 million from the Freeport, has gone into the land remediation on the site, and that was actually produced to us in the evidence that they submitted to us.
Yeah. The South Tees Development Corporation was set up before the Freeport was established. And I think one of the things that I would say is there was...
You're not, Michael, you're not inviting us to believe that there are no advantages associated with the Freeport that have not flattered the value of the land in question.
I'm saying two things. The first is that there was a previous and unrelated allegation about crustacean deaths related to the Freeport and Ben. My belief is, on the basis of all of the evidence, that this was a politically motivated attack on Ben for a variety of reasons. There was no evidence at all that those crustacean deaths had anything to do with the economic activity of the Freeport.
I think we need to be diverted by crustacean deaths. The
No,
question
I
here is about best value for the taxpayer.
No, I think it's critical here because, and it's not a point that an allegation or a criticism that I would lay at this committee's door or your door or at Ian's door, because I think there are legitimate questions. But it is the case that because of Ben's success, he has attracted political opposition. That political opposition has leapt on phenomena and reporting in order to try to besmirch his name. And one of the reasons why Ben himself wanted an inquiry is because he is confident that some of the lurid allegations that have been made against him are not justified by the facts.
As we stand today, is the Teesside Freeport still a flagship case study for your Freeport policy?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Secretary of State, Lord Johnson, that's been a really illuminating session. Thank you so much for coming before us to help us